School of Journalism. Welcome to Global Journalism. I'm Jason McClure. There's been a lot of media coverage lately dedicated to the spread of the Ebola virus in Africa, which is estimated to have killed at least 2,300 people. The outbreak began in December 2013, when the first cases of Ebola virus were reported in Guinea, in West Africa. Since then, the disease has spread to neighboring Senegal and Sierra Leone, and from there to Liberia. Both the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization warn that unless immediate action is taken, the outbreak could become unmanageable. Already, this outbreak has infected and killed more people than all other Ebola outbreaks combined, and countries and medical officials alike are wondering just what to do next. In the U.S., President Obama has said the U.S. military could send as many as 3,000 people to Africa to try to bring the epidemic under control. Today on Global Journalist, we take a look at the Ebola outbreak and the challenges of reporting on it. We're joined from Dakar, Senegal by Misha Hussein, the West and Central Africa correspondent for the Thomson Reuters Foundation. From Phoenix, Arizona by Bill Miller, a medical doctor and scientific advisor to Omnibiome Therapeutics. And from Monrovia, Liberia by photojournalist Ahmed Jalanzo. Misha Hussein, I wanted to start with you. Could you give us just a little bit of background about what you saw when you went to Guinea early in the epidemic? I understand that you were one of the first international journalists to cover this.
Sure. I think perhaps what I saw when I got there first, and we'll talk about April here, is shock, really. The fact that this virus had suddenly turned up in Guinea and in West Africa, people just weren't prepared for that. So I think there was a massive impact in terms of shock, and that really frightened people. So not only did you have the shock, but you had the fright that came with it. Because in Central Africa, as you mentioned in your lead, this has happened many, many, many times before. So people are accustomed to it, and they know how to deal with it and bring it under control. But here in West Africa, they had never experienced it. So you really saw this feeling of shock and the fright that came with it as well.
And Ahmed Jalanzo, you're in Monrovia, which is really sort of the epicenter of the outbreak right now in Liberia. Tell us, what is the mood of people there right now? Do people feel like the government and the international community have a handle on things?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. The people, the atmosphere in Monrovia now, the people, the fear is there. So much of death. People have fear, and they are blaming the government. The government, in the beginning part of it, that is in March, overlooked it, and there is a slow. The response from the international community, as far as the people are concerned, is very slow. People are fighting. As I speak to you, I'm just on the front line somewhere in a treatment center where so many patients sitting in a waiting room, abandoned. There are no enough beds to take in patients. And when I get there, when I started covering them, it was like, hey, we don't need a coverage. You need to tell this the government, the international community to come in. We are dying by the minute. And of course, yes, people, we are dying as I speak to you.
That sounds like a very desperate scene. I understand that you were also in the West Point neighborhood of Monrovia last month when it was effectively quarantined. This is when the Liberian government came and basically shut off a neighborhood of the city from the rest of the city, and the people there were understandably quite angry. Could you tell us about what that was like?
Yes, indeed. I just jumped into my car and decided to go down the West Point when it started very early hours in the morning. When I got there, what I saw was the security forces, the police, and the military. We are gearing up to enter West Point in order to evacuate the commissioner of that township. And the residents of West Point, we are accusing the commissioner of abandoning them, taking her relatives, family members out. The residents of West Point besiege our home, our resident, that is not going to go anywhere. All of them have to stay there and go through the quarantine he was not going to leave them alone. So, our house was besieged. So the security forces say, hey, we are not going to stay back and see this woman be mobbed to death. So they walked in. So I, including other journalists, followed them. We went in there. There was an evacuation coming in. And the protesters, the residents of West Point, we are throwing stones. They were saying that the family don't have to go. They have to stay there. She is the leader of them, so they have to stay. So while coming, they were throwing stones. At the same time, there was sporadic shooting all over the place until we leave the West Point area and came to a buffer zone where the residents were not allowed to pass through to get to the city center. So that's where the whole thing started. There was sporadic shooting in the air. These guys were advancing to approach the security forces. So that's how all it started. Just a few minutes later, we saw a little boy lying down with his legs broken completely, completely broken off, bleeding profusely without help for hours. So exactly that's what happened down West Point.
That sounds like a very disturbing scene, and we know that you took some very powerful photographs of that, which our listeners can view on globaljournalist.org. Misha Hussein, I wanted to ask you, what were some of the misconceptions that you saw in Guinea among the population about what Ebola was and how it was transmitted?
I think there's a few that I can mention. The first real kind of misconception was this idea that Ebola was brought to Guinea by Western doctors. So often you saw the Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières under attack. Their clinics were under attack, their staff were under attack. And this is because the locals believed that they had brought the disease to town. So that's one of the big misconceptions. While I was there, I saw that people were receiving text messages, this is on SMS, on their mobile phones, with the cure to Ebola, which was apparently by some Guinean doctor who'd studied in Senegal, and the text message read that the Ebola cure was, I believe it was Nescafe, lemon, sugar, and something else along those lines, and that if you have this like 3 times a day for a week, you're going to be cured of Ebola. So that was another kind of misconception. And the third one was that, there's a lot of kind of, I hesitate to say black magic, but there's this belief in witchcraft and traditional healers and things like that. And people truly believe that if they got ill, they can go and see a traditional healer and all their kind of ailments will be cured. And this is kind of what they did instead of seeking help directly to the government health facilities or to the Western doctors that I was talking about. So I think the Liberia cases all started because a local healer had died. And we know where that's taken us now, So these are the 3 kind of misconceptions that I came across while I was in Gekedu in Guinea.
You're listening to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. We're talking today about the spread of Ebola in West Africa and the challenges of covering that story. Our guests today are Misha Hussein, the West and Central Africa correspondent for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, Bill Miller, a medical doctor and scientific advisor to Omnibiome Therapeutics, and photojournalist Ahmed Jalanzo. For more Global Journalist content, visit us online at globaljournalist.org. There you can listen to or watch episodes from our archive and read in-depth articles on international affairs and free press issues. We're also on social media. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter @GlobalJourn. Ahmed Jalanzo in Monrovia, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the Liberian media has covered the current outbreak and some of the difficulties that you may have encountered in taking pictures of people who are suffering from a disease with quite a lot of stigma to it, where there's no known cure, no known vaccine at this point.
Yeah, the local media, as you know, the local media does not have the necessary support in terms of logistics to move around. So it's like they have to walk around by foot. They don't have a vehicle to move around. But in as much we have to tell the story, we have to be there. and looking at your compatriots dying and you taking up a camera and taking pictures is quite unfortunate when these things happen. Sometimes the patients, the relatives get furious about that, but we take our time to let them know that we have to tell the story. We need help. So you guys need to give us the opportunity to tell the story, even though you guys are dying, you guys are suffering, but we have to tell the story as locals so that the international community will be informed, will be conscientized, so that the needed help would come, so that we can get out of this outbreak.
And Misha Hussein, I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about your experiences in Guinea. I understand that you had met with someone who had survived having Ebola. What sort of difficulties does that present?
Yes, so you're talking about this young woman called Rose Camano, and her grandmother had died. Her mother had died, and she was infected, and I think one of her nieces also was infected as well. So it really infected the whole family. Often that is the case. I found it's really quite tragic that a whole kind of family can be taken out, and people who are infected, often they have nowhere to turn and nowhere to go to. It's a very, very kind of lonely disease, and that's very clear when you speak to these people. They're isolated, they're scared, and they're told that the people that they love and that they hold close to them can't see them, can't touch them, and often can't even speak to them. So you get this overwhelming feeling of loneliness that comes across from them, and that's something that's very hard to deal with as a journalist. That's my impression of it anyway. Yeah.
Dr. Miller, President Obama has said he intends to send 3,000 U.S. military troops to West Africa, which is quite a significant response. Why do you think we're seeing such a large response now to this from the U.S. government?
The reason for this is Ebola is not really different from many of the scourges that we've been faced with before. It's very typical in certain respects. What is different now is the capacity for almost instantaneous worldwide spread. That's the new ingredient. And so it is reasonable to be quite frightened about the capacity of this to extend beyond the normal endemic area, the area that it has normally infected repeatedly throughout recorded history. So the response by the United States, which is to send 3,000 military troops, may be the best thing to do in an extremely bad situation. But this points out to us that we really must do a very different kind of preparedness than we've ever done before.
And Ahmed Jalanzo in Liberia, can you tell us what has been the reaction in Liberia to this announcement that there will be U.S. troops coming? And then I was also wondering if you could speak to how people are handling the bodies of those who have died of Ebola there, because I understand that that is one key transmission point, is when people are preparing the bodies of the deceased, that Ebola remains very much contagious at that point.
The mood in Monrovia right now, the people, the Liberians are impatient to see this 300,000, these 3,000 troops can touch down at the Liberian National Airport. And Liberians are waiting. Every time that even if it's a minute, it's too late for this 3,000 troops to step down. It's a welcoming news. Everyone is waiting. People are waiting for the vaccines that have been promised in October. With President Obama giving that spoke about these 3,000 troops coming. It's a welcome idea. People are waiting. They are impatient to see these people. As I told you earlier, I'm just from the front line at the treatment center. You won't believe it. When I get there with my colleagues, everyone rushed to us. Please come and interview us. When are the Americans coming? The atmosphere is very tense, and they are impatient, waiting for the Americans to come. As you know, there's a traditional relationship between Liberia and the United States, and our president wrote President Obama for help because we cannot just contain the situation. We are dying by the day. I'm feeling so bad. Can you imagine? Even I, as a photojournalist, as I cover this story, I mean, those who are dying, they are not better than me or other journalists are covering. But we are covering a story, and we are not seeing this enemy. This enemy is Ebola, and we disinfect ourselves. Sometimes when I get home, I'm traumatized. The trauma is there. You have your family. You won't believe it. I have covered Ebola from the front lines. I disinfect my protective gears, my boots, my rubber boots. But I'm not just satisfied. I throw 4 pair of shoes away because I don't want to infect. I don't want to be infected, and I also don't want to infect my family back home, my neighborhood. Can you imagine this? It's terrible. So in a nutshell, Liberians are waiting, and we are very, very happy and waiting for the troops to touch down at the Roberts International Airport.
And Misha Hussein, perhaps you could speak to this point about burial practices. What are some of the difficulties in trying to prevent transmission from someone who has died of Ebola?
Well, I think the difficulty is that these are cultural and traditional practices that have been happening for thousands and thousands of years. So how do you tell people to stop that, especially when you're presenting the argument to stop that as an invisible kind of microbe that they can't see? So trying to use education works to a certain extent, but when you have a broad base of the population that hasn't been to school, can't read or write, and they live in these local kind of isolated communities, trying to convince them that they can't practice their traditional burials because of some invisible killer, it just doesn't really wash with them. And that's something that we're seeing the WHO and the government and the health workers on the ground really fight against at the moment.
You're listening to Global Journalist. I'm Jason McClure. We're talking today about the spread of Ebola in West Africa and the challenges of covering that story. Our guests today are Misha Hussein, the West and Central Africa correspondent for the Thomson Reuters Foundation, Bill Miller, a medical doctor and scientific advisor to Omnibiome Therapeutics, and photojournalist Ahmed Jalanzo. For more Global Journalist content, visit us online at globaljournalist.org. There you can listen to or watch episodes from our archive and read in-depth articles on international affairs and free press issues. We're also on social media. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at GlobalJourn. Dr. Miller, I wanted to ask you, how close is the medical and scientific community to finding an effective vaccine or effective treatment for Ebola? You said earlier this was similar to other diseases and other epidemics.
There seems to be a very rapid progress now towards a vaccine. In fact, there was just an announcement the other day that one of the British pharmaceutical companies is running a very aggressive set of trials, including vaccinating healthy volunteers in order to determine whether or not this new vaccine that has been developed is really effective. One of the problems is that there is no one single strain of Ebola. There are several, at least 5, and it is not absolutely clear that a vaccine would be protective, say, for Ebola Zaire, that is effective for Ebola Sudan. So although there's a likelihood that they will cross, until you test it, you really don't know for sure. One of the problems with these kinds of circumstances is that now we're trying to proceed very, very fast. And I really believe that this is a global shot across the bow. Here is an opportunity for us to do things very differently. This is not the first epidemic, and it's not going to be the last. These are ever occurring. This one will die out eventually. It will peak at some point, unpredictably right now, as to where the highest amplitude will be. It could be a very frightening amplitude, but in the end, it will die away, and then we'll be faced with the concern of what do we do about the next circumstance. Now that we live in an interconnected world, we don't have the luxury of the same amount of time that we used to. So these vaccination investigations have to be ongoing. and there have to be appropriate rewards for companies that take these risks so that there's an impetus to do this. And I think that we're finally learning some new skills by doing this.
And Ahmed Jalanzo, in Liberia, how do people perceive the research efforts now? When there were 2 U.S. doctors who contracted Ebola, there was quite a lot of media coverage of their treatment. Are people demanding that they receive similar treatment in Liberia?
Exactly. As I speak to you, people, as an individual, people ask me every day as a journalist, when are these? When will these experimental tests of vaccines will be sent to Liberia? You know, people are expecting it. I mean, it's too late, and we need it. They need it now. People are dying as I speak to you. As I told you earlier, I went to a treatment center. People are dying. On the streets of Monrovia, in street corners, people are dying. I mean, for now, you don't have to. I don't have, like in the earlier part, I used to follow the burial team, but now there's burial team all over the city. People drop, die, and just die. So people are waiting, are hurriedly, are impatient, waiting for the vaccines to come down so that we can get out of this outbreak.
And Dr. Miller, how imminent is this research? Are there experimental vaccines or experimental treatments that could be given now to people in Liberia or in Sierra Leone or in Guinea?
Well, that's a very good question. The problem is that the vaccines have not been widely tested. And although your heart breaks with what you hear from Ahmed or Misha, the first dictum in medicine is to do no harm. And so you have to proceed with some reasonable caution that you haven't made the circumstances worse. One of the problems that you have with experimenting is that if you give a vaccine to people willy-nilly and you throw it in there and hope that it works, you don't know that you've somehow allowed the virus to mutate faster than it had before. If this virus goes from spreading from contact, from contaminants, from fluids, from blood, from excreta, from other things, so that it goes by touch, contact, and it becomes airborne, and it's not out of the question that this kind of a viral disease could do so, then you have a huge multiplication of risk. So you have to be cautious. It is heartbreaking, but it has to be done sequentially and carefully. And when it's done in the Western tradition, you have to have people that are vaccinated that are being informed of the risk. The ethical principles still exist on both sides of the equation. That's why this circumstance is so particularly difficult.
Misha, I was hoping that you could speak a little bit on this issue as well and address some of the difficulties that you've had in obtaining accurate information about the epidemic from the United Nations, from the World Health Organization, from the governments in West Africa.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we touched on it earlier that this is it's not only a humanitarian kind of disaster now, but it's a real political and economic issue. And whenever politics or economics comes into things, then you start getting concealment of the truth. And the UN does this just as much as any government does for any number of reasons. So trying to get early information from the WHO, for example, about how complex, how severe, how disastrous this is going to be, it was like pulling teeth, you know. On the one hand, you had MSF saying this is a geographically unprecedented scale. Something needs to happen, and it needs to happen fast. And on the other hand, you had the WHO saying to them, you're spreading panic. This is nowhere near as bad as you're saying it is. We've dealt with this disease 25 times before in 40 years. We know what we're doing. And as a journalist, you're caught in between these two kind of warring factions, thinking, well, who am I meant to believe? On the one hand, we have the UN, who we are meant to trust. And on the other hand, you have MSF, who we do trust from their past statements. And
MSF is Médecins Sans Frontières, the French medical organization, correct?
Right, exactly. Though it's the Belgian branch that led this kind of response. So you really don't know who to turn to for the truth, because there seems to be a lot of concealment. And that's my experience in this Ebola outbreak and many, many other things as well in West Africa in terms of the UN.
Ahmed Jalanzo, I was hoping you could speak to what the effect of the outbreak has been in Liberia for those who haven't contracted the disease. It seems like there have been widespread economic repercussions, widespread social repercussions. How is life proceeding? Can you go to the market and buy food during the daytime? Are government workers showing up in their offices, or has life really come to a standstill?
Yeah, since the outbreak, the government issued a statement that non-essential workers should stay home for a month. And that month has expired, and the government have extended it to another month. So the economic activities, the Ebola outbreak have tremendously brought the economy to its knees. People cannot afford to buy their daily meal. Before the outbreak, Liberians, the Liberians, mostly the poor, cannot afford a meal a day. Now it's worse. As you walk on the streets, people stop by and beg for food. Friends are going without food. Government employees, especially the medical workers, by the day or week are demonstrating for pay, for their salaries, for back pays. People cannot afford to go to the market to buy food. The business, I'm talking about the Asians, the foreigners who have huge investment, have left the country because of fear of Ebola. These are so many things. There are no much job going on, no much work going on. People are just having that fear. Those who have not contracted the disease are doing everything to adhere to the preventive measure, wash your hands regularly, doing this until the vaccines can come in, until the U.S. Troops can step into the Liberian soil, so that we can be safe from this outbreak.
Dr. Miller, with just about 20 seconds left, I want to give the last word to you. I should mention you're the author of a new book called The Microcosm Within: Evolution and Extinction in the Hologenome. What are one or two steps that the United States and others in the international community could be doing now to prevent this from spreading?
I want to address one thing that Misha said that is very important, the issue of trust. Can people get information that they can trust? Everything else has to flow from the people are willing to accept that what they're being told is the correct and best thing that they can do. So we could put together a team of independent research analysts, experts that are separate from government agencies, separate from the UN, and this is a rapid response team. They're the first people that do the assessment. They can give information to journalists and to the population and to the leaders of the countries so that we could formulate from a point of trust all the other necessary things that we need to do. And there are many that we can do effectively so that the next time that we have this sort of problem, we are much better prepared than we are today.
That's all for this edition of Global Journalist, a production of the Reynolds Journalism Institute and the Missouri School of Journalism. Our thanks to Misha Hussein, Bill Miller, and Ahmed Jalanzo for joining us. Our executive producer is Casey Morrell. Our lead producer this week is Taylor DeHaze, with assistance from Pablo Gabilondo, Mary Ryan, and Laura Welfinger. Travis McMillan from RJI is our technical director. For all of us at Global Journalist, I'm Jason McClure. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.